I sued my whole family after they stole my inheritance for my sister's wedding. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My hand didn't shake as I signed the legal documents to bankrupt my parents. I sat in the sterile, aggressively air-conditioned conference room of my attorney's office, feeling an absolute, profound sense of cold detachment. The heavy black ink from the fountain pen bled into the thick legal paper, officially authorizing a massive fraud lawsuit against my own flesh and blood. For 28 years, I had played the role of the dutiful, undemanding daughter, quietly fading into the background while my younger sister, Chloe, consumed every ounce of my parents' emotional and financial resources. But they had finally crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. My late grandfather Arthur had left me a heavily protected trust fund, a carefully guarded nest egg of exactly $150,000. It was specifically designated to become accessible on my 20th birthday. It was my guaranteed future, my ticket to a modest home, and my safety net in a family that never truly cared if I fell. But a week ago, I discovered that my parents, acting as the designated trustees, had systematically forged my signature and completely drained the account down to a miserable zero. They didn't steal it for a medical emergency or to save their home from foreclosure. They stole my entire future to fund Chloe's absurdly extravagant, aggressively publicized aesthetic dream wedding. They spent my house down payment on custom imported orchids, a $15,000 designer gown, and a lavish country club reception meant to impress people they barely even liked. Tomorrow is Chloe's rehearsal dinner, the glittering precursor to the social event of the season. She has absolutely no idea that the money fueling her extravagant fairy tale was stolen directly from my life savings. My parents believe they have successfully bullied me into silent, obedient submission, convinced I will simply swallow this monumental betrayal to keep the family peace. They are tragically mistaken. I have spent the last few weeks smiling at their faces while secretly orchestrating the complete and total destruction of their financial lives. The legal trap is fully set, the asset freeze is legally armed, and the explosion is imminent. Every single lie they told is about to violently catch up with them. To understand the absolute audacity of this betrayal, you have to understand the deeply toxic architecture of our family dynamics. From the moment my younger sister Chloe was born, she was the undisputed, radiant center of my parents' universe. She was the textbook golden child, vivacious, demanding, and fiercely protected from any form of accountability or discomfort. If Chloe wanted piano lessons, my parents eagerly bought a baby grand. If I needed a tutor for advanced calculus, I was told to figure it out at the public library. I was the designated scapegoat, the fiercely independent daughter who learned early on that asking for help was a completely useless endeavor. My mother, Helen, was a master manipulator who weaponized guilt like a precision instrument. She constantly reminded me that I needed to be the strong one because Chloe was sensitive. The only person in our entire bloodline who saw right through this blinding favoritism was my grandfather Arthur. He was a stoic, hard-working man who built a successful hardware business from scratch. He valued pragmatism over pretense. We spent countless hours together in his dusty garage, where he taught me how to fix broken engines and manage a budget. He actively recognized that my parents were fundamentally incapable of prioritizing my needs. Before he passed away when I was 19, he set up a highly specific, legally binding trust fund entirely in my name. He explicitly made my parents the temporary trustees because of complex estate tax laws at the time, but the stipulations were crystal clear. The money was exclusively mine, completely inaccessible to anyone until my 20th birthday. "This is for your foundation, Maya," he rasped from his hospital bed, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't let them take your independence." For 9 years, I lived incredibly frugally. I drove a beat-up sedan, lived in a cramped, drafty apartment with 2 roommates, and aggressively saved every spare penny from my accounting job. I endured my mother's constant, condescending remarks about my unflattering lifestyle, while she proudly subsidized Chloe's luxurious vacations and designer handbags. I didn't care about their shallow criticisms because I knew my grandfather's gift was waiting to safely launch my future. Little did I know, the vultures had already circled my only safety net. My 20th birthday finally arrived, a crisp Tuesday morning that felt like the absolute zenith of my entire adult life. I had meticulously planned this exact day for 9 years. I took the entire afternoon off work, dressed in my favorite professional blazer, and drove directly to the main branch of the regional bank where Grandfather Arthur had established the trust. I had a brightly colored folder sitting on the passenger seat, filled to the brim with printed real estate listings. I had already been pre-approved for a mortgage on a beautiful, historic townhouse, and this $150,000 was going to cover a massive down payment and all immediate renovations. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the bank, my heart hammering a frantic, joyous rhythm against my ribs. I approached the teller's counter, handed over my driver's license and my original birth certificate, and confidently requested the complete transfer of the trust assets into my primary checking account. The teller, a friendly older woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, smiled warmly and began typing the account numbers into her terminal. I stood there, mentally arranging the furniture in my future living room, completely oblivious to the impending disaster. Suddenly, the rhythmic clicking of her keyboard stopped dead. The warm, polite smile completely vanished from her face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion. She aggressively tapped the screen, her brow furrowing into deep, worried lines. She asked me to wait a moment and nervously scurried over to a frosted glass cubicle to fetch the branch manager. The air in the bank suddenly felt incredibly thick and suffocating. 5 minutes later, the manager, a man with a tight, uncomfortable expression, escorted me into his private office. He closed the door with a heavy, ominous click. He slid a freshly printed ledger across the mahogany desk, avoiding my eyes entirely. The numbers printed in bold black ink violently assaulted my vision. The current balance of the heavily protected trust fund my grandfather left me was exactly $0.00. My breathing completely stopped as the sterile walls began to spin. I stared blindly at the zero balance, my brain desperately misfiring as it tried to process the catastrophic impossibility of the numbers. There has to be a massive banking error, I stammered, my voice sounding incredibly hollow and distant in the quiet office. Nobody was legally allowed to touch this money until today. It's a restricted trust. The manager released a heavy, deeply uncomfortable sigh and tapped the thick stack of transaction histories. "I am incredibly sorry, Maya," he said softly. "The funds weren't lost in a system glitch. They were systematically withdrawn over the course of the last 8 months by the designated trustees, your parents." He pushed the detailed transaction log toward me. The paper trail was a horrific, glaring map of absolute betrayal. I tracked the outbound wire transfers, my eyes wide with visceral shock. $30,000 was wired directly to Elite Bridal Designs. $25,000 went to Magnolia Manor Country Club. Another $40,000 was transferred directly into my parents' personal joint checking account, followed immediately by massive payments to 3 different high-interest credit card companies. The remaining funds were scattered across luxury florists, a boutique catering service, and a high-end photography studio. My parents hadn't just stolen a few $1,000s in a moment of desperate panic. They had aggressively and methodically liquidated my entire future to finance Chloe's absurd, highly publicized wedding and magically erase their own crippling consumer debt. How did they bypass the age restriction? I demanded, a cold, metallic fury beginning to replace the initial shock. The manager pulled out a digitized copy of an authorization form. There, right on the bottom line, was my signature, granting my parents full early access to the trust. It was a spectacular, almost perfect forgery. My mother had carefully traced the signature from an old college loan document. They had committed blatant, premeditated financial fraud. I felt a violent sickness twist deep in my stomach, a visceral reaction to the sheer scale of the theft. I gathered the damning documents and walked out of the bank with a terrifying purpose. I didn't drive back to my cramped apartment. I drove my rusted sedan straight to my parents' sprawling, heavily mortgaged house in the suburbs. The drive was a complete blur of white-hot adrenaline and crushing heartbreak. When I violently pushed open the heavy oak front door, I was immediately assaulted by the sickening, overwhelming scent of imported white roses and expensive vanilla candles. The living room had been transformed into a chaotic wedding staging area. Massive, Wildly expensive floral centerpieces covered every available surface. My mother, Helen, was carefully steaming a delicate silk bridesmaid dress, while my sister, Chloe, sat casually on the velvet sofa, sipping a glass of expensive champagne and aggressively scrolling through social media on her brand new phone. The sheer visual contrast of the scene felt like a physical slap across the face. My stolen future, the safe foundation my grandfather had desperately wanted me to have, was currently financing the absurd, temporary extravagance surrounding me. "Oh, Maya, you're finally here," my mother chirped, not even bothering to look up from the steamer. "You simply must try on your dress today. The alterations are finally finished." I stood rigidly in the doorway, clutching the thick envelope of bank documents so tightly my knuckles were completely white. I looked at Chloe, who was practically glowing with the arrogant satisfaction of a woman who had never been told no in her entire life. She was proudly wearing my house down payment in the form of custom aesthetic choices and catered appetizers. I felt a dangerous, terrifyingly calm energy settle deep into my bones. What would you do if your sister wore your life savings as a dress? For a brief, agonizing second, I considered screaming, tearing down the imported floral arrangements, and violently flipping the glass coffee table. But I quickly realized that raw emotional outbursts were exactly what they expected from the unstable scapegoat. I slowly walked forward and threw the thick bank ledger directly onto the glass table. The heavy bank envelope hit the glass coffee table with a sharp, violent smack. Chloe jumped, spilling a drop of champagne, while my mother finally looked up, an expression of profound irritation crossing her face. "What on earth is wrong with you, Maya?" she snapped. I pointed a trembling finger at the documents. "I went to the bank today, Mom, for my 20th birthday, to finally claim grandfather's trust fund." The color instantly drained from my mother's face, leaving behind a stark, terrified paleness. Chloe looked totally confused, entirely unaware of where her magical wedding budget had actually come from. "Where is my $150,000? I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. My mother immediately deployed her classic, highly manipulative defense mechanism, weaponized tears. Her eyes welled up as she placed her hands dramatically over her heart. "Maya, please try to understand," she pleaded, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "We were drowning in credit card debt. And Chloe found the perfect venue. We're family. You know we would never intentionally hurt you. We were going to slowly pay you back after the wedding." I stared at her, utterly repulsed by the pathetic, transparent lies. Pay me back? With what? They were deeply in debt before they decided to commit federal fraud. "You forged my signature on legal bank documents," I stated plainly, refusing to be pulled into her emotional vortex. "You committed identity theft to throw a party." My mother's face instantly hardened, the fake tears vanishing as quickly as they appeared. The gaslighting began immediately. "You are being incredibly dramatic," she hissed, crossing her arms defensively. "You don't even need a house right now. You're single, and you live alone. Chloe deserves her dream day. Grandpa Arthur would have wanted us to use the money to keep this family together and happy." I was absolutely paralyzed by the staggering, monumental audacity of her justification. I turned my gaze slowly toward Chloe, waiting for the horrifying realization of the theft to finally hit her. I foolishly expected my sister to be disgusted that her fairy tale wedding was entirely funded by severe financial crimes committed against her own sibling. Instead, Chloe dramatically rolled her eyes, setting her expensive champagne flute down on a customized coaster. "Are you seriously doing this right now, Maya?" Chloe groaned, her tone dripping with intense, infuriating condescension. "You are deliberately trying to ruin my entire vibe over just money. It's my wedding month." My jaw literally dropped. She wasn't horrified. She was incredibly annoyed that my stolen life savings were slightly inconveniencing her mood. "It's not just money, Chloe," I snapped, the rage finally bleeding into my voice. "It is my entire future. It was Grandpa Arthur's gift to me." Chloe stood up, aggressively smoothing down her designer loungewear. "Well, Mom and Dad are the ones who gave me the budget. If you have a problem, take it up with them, but do not drag your toxic, selfish energy into my wedding space. You've always been so incredibly greedy." The sheer, unadulterated entitlement was breathtaking. In that specific, agonizing moment, a massive paradigm shift occurred within my mind. I looked at the three people standing in that lavish living room and realized, with absolute, terrifying clarity, that they did not view me as a human being. They did not view me as a daughter or a sister. They viewed me strictly as a financial resource, a convenient sacrificial lamb designated to automatically subsidize their reckless, status-obsessed lifestyle. I was nothing more than a bank account they felt completely entitled to drain. Any lingering sense of familial loyalty or misguided guilt instantly evaporated from my soul, replaced by a cold, calculating void. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just silently walked out the heavy front door. I sat in the driver's seat of my car for a solid 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned a bruised, painful shade of purple. The heartbreak had been completely burned away, leaving behind pure, crystalline, unadulterated rage. A normal person might have called a therapist to process the intense emotional trauma of such a catastrophic family betrayal. I didn't call a therapist. I pulled out my phone and immediately searched for the most aggressive, ruthless trust litigation attorney in the entire state. That is exactly how I found Mr. Vance. His online reviews described him as a legal shark, a man who possessed absolutely zero patience for familial sentimentality and specialized in brutally destroying entitled people who breached fiduciary duties. I called his office and demanded an emergency consultation, explicitly stating that I possessed documented proof of a six-figure trust fund fraud involving forged signatures. 2 days later, I was sitting in his sleek, intimidating law office, located in the highest skyscraper downtown. Mr. Vance was a severe, sharply dressed man in his 50s with piercing eyes that seemed to analyze every single micro-expression on my face. I handed him the brightly colored folder, replacing my real estate listings with the horrific bank ledgers, the forged authorization forms, and the comprehensive timeline of the withdrawals. He reviewed the documents in total, agonizing silence for nearly 10 minutes. When he finally looked up, a terrifying, predatory smile crept across his face. "Your parents are remarkably stupid criminals, Maya," he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum of sheer professional satisfaction. "They left a paper trail so wide and explicitly documented that a first-year law student could easily secure a massive conviction. Are you entirely prepared to unleash absolute hell on your own flesh and blood?" I looked him dead in the eye, ready to burn their entire world to ash. The investigation moved forward with terrifying, surgical precision. Mr. Vance deployed a team of forensic accountants to thoroughly dissect the financial bloodbath my parents had created. They didn't just breach their fiduciary duty, they completely obliterated it. The forensic team quickly discovered that my parents had actively used my grandfather's trust to completely pay off $50,000 in deeply delinquent, high-interest credit card debt. They had been secretly living wildly beyond their means for years, desperately trying to maintain a wealthy facade in their upscale neighborhood. The remaining $100,000 was systematically funneled directly into the wedding industrial complex. Mr. Vance traced exact wire routing numbers to the specific vendors. We found the massive deposits for the luxury country club venue, the obscenely expensive celebrity catering company, and the custom, imported floral arrangements that I had seen scattered around their living room. "This isn't just a simple civil dispute, Maya," Mr. Vance explained, aggressively tapping his expensive pen against the thick stack of subpoenas. "The forgery of your signature on the early release authorization elevates this directly into the realm of severe criminal fraud. If we report this to the authorities immediately, your parents will be arrested." I felt a sudden, sharp pang of anxiety, a lingering ghost of my lifelong conditioning to protect them. But then I fiercely remembered Chloe's disgustingly entitled face, complaining about my toxic energy while wearing my stolen future. However, Mr. Vance had a highly strategic reason for pausing the immediate criminal report. "If we arrest them today, the money is gone. The vendors have it. We need to trap the funds before the services are fully rendered at the wedding." He leaned across his massive desk, his eyes locking intensely onto mine. "I need you to go back into the lion's den and gather the final contracts." Mr. Vance's advice was completely agonizing, but strategically flawless. Play along. Be the submissive daughter they expect. I had to transform myself into the ultimate Trojan horse. The following Sunday, I drove back to my parents' house, forcing my facial muscles into a mask of pathetic, defeated submission. I walked into the kitchen, where my mother was enthusiastically reviewing linen swatches, and delivered the hardest performance of my entire life. I apologized. I literally forced the vile, degrading words past my teeth, telling them that I had severely overreacted and that I finally understood why they needed the money for the family's social standing. I just want Chloe to have a beautiful wedding. I lied, my voice dripping with manufactured sincerity. My mother visibly relaxed, releasing a massive, dramatic sigh of total relief. She immediately rushed over and hugged me, completely oblivious to the fact that she was embracing a fully armed legal explosive. "I knew you would finally come to your senses, sweetheart," she whispered, patting my back condescendingly. "You've always been our strong, reliable girl." The nausea was absolutely overwhelming, but I swallowed it down. I seamlessly integrated myself back into the bridal party duties, becoming the most helpful, attentive bridesmaid in the entire group. I eagerly volunteered to organize the master wedding binder, a massive, obnoxious pink folder containing every single detail of the upcoming event. My parents, completely blinded by their own narcissism and arrogant relief, gladly handed over the administrative burden. They had absolutely no idea that I was meticulously recording every single bank routing number, every hidden vendor contract, and every final payment deadline directly into a secure, encrypted folder on my phone. I was quietly mapping the exact coordinates for the most devastating financial airstrike imaginable. The absolute pinnacle of this horrific psychological torture occurred during Chloe's final bridal dress fitting. I sat on a plush, suffocatingly pink velvet sofa in the VIP suite of an exclusive bridal boutique, pretending to sip complimentary champagne. Chloe stepped out from behind the heavy silk curtains, spinning dramatically in a custom, hand-beaded designer gown that cost exactly $15,000. The intricately placed pearls caught the light beautifully, and my mother immediately burst into theatrical tears of joy. "You look like an absolute princess, Chloe," my mother sobbed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. I smiled tightly, feeling a violent wave of revulsion. I wasn't looking at a beautiful dress. I was looking directly at a massive chunk of the down payment for my stolen house. While my mother and sister were completely distracted by the tailor pinning the extravagant train, I noticed my mother's designer handbag sitting open on the nearby armchair. The master wedding binder was peeking out of the top. With my heart hammering frantically against my ribs, I quickly slid my phone from my pocket. I silently stepped over to the bag, pretending to examine a veil display, and swiftly opened the binder. I rapidly photographed the final catering invoice, the remaining balance due for the massive floral installation, and the deposit receipt for the luxury country club. These were the crucial missing pieces Mr. Vance desperately needed, the exact legal entities currently holding my stolen inheritance. Chloe suddenly turned around, her eyes narrowing as she caught my reflection in the massive mirror. "Maya, what are you doing over there?" she demanded, her voice sharp and highly suspicious. I smoothly dropped my phone back into my pocket and grabbed a lace veil. "Just looking at the accessories, Chloe, making sure everything is completely perfect for your big day." I smiled, knowing her perfect day was about to violently and spectacularly implode forever. The moment I left the boutique, I drove directly to Mr. Vance's office and handed over the encrypted flash drive containing the final, highly detailed vendor photographs. He plugged it into his computer, his eyes rapidly scanning the high-resolution images of the invoices and routing numbers. "This is absolutely perfect, Maya," he said, a sharp, dangerous grin appearing on his face. "We now have the complete, undeniable financial architecture of their fraud." He immediately drafted a massive, devastating civil lawsuit against my parents for gross breach of fiduciary duty, severe civil fraud, and total conversion of assets. But the true genius of Mr. Vance's strategy wasn't just the lawsuit itself. It was the weaponization of the timing. He drafted an emergency ex parte motion for a prejudgment writ of attachment. In simple terms, he was asking a judge to instantly and aggressively freeze every single bank account my parents owned, along with all the specific vendor accounts that had received the stolen trust funds, to explicitly prevent the money from being permanently dissipated. The judge will sign this immediately based on the explicit forgery evidence, Mr. Vance explained, neatly stacking the thick legal documents. We are going to drop this massive legal bomb exactly 48 hours before the ceremony begins. They won't have time to secure a massive loan. They won't have time to hide any remaining cash, and they certainly won't have time to pay the final vendor balances required to host the event. The sheer brilliance of the trap was breathtaking. I was legally stopping my stolen money from paying for the final execution of the wedding. I signed the final affidavits with a remarkably steady hand, feeling a profound, heavy sense of absolute justice settling over my shoulders. I signed the documents, ready to watch my toxic family's entire world violently burn. Exactly 48 hours before Chloe was scheduled to walk down the aisle, the heavy judicial hammer officially dropped. It was Thursday morning, and I was sitting at my desk at the accounting firm when my phone abruptly buzzed. It was a brief, coded text from Mr. Vance. The freeze is active. Accounts are locked. A terrifying, exhilarating shiver violently raced down my spine. The trap had officially snapped shut. I spent the entire afternoon quietly organizing my spreadsheets, waiting for the inevitable explosion. It didn't happen immediately, because my parents were blissfully unaware of the catastrophic legal storm silently engulfing their finances. That evening was the lavish rehearsal dinner, hosted at the exact luxury country club funded by my grandfather's stolen money. I drove to the venue, dressed in a modest navy dress, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. I walked into the grand ballroom, which was completely dripping in expensive crystal chandeliers and massive, imported floral centerpieces. My parents were cheerfully holding court, laughing loudly with the wealthy groomsmen, projecting the perfect image of an affluent, successful family. Chloe was practically vibrating with toxic excitement, showing off her massive diamond ring to anyone who would look. I sat quietly at a corner table, sipping sparkling water, watching the beautiful, incredibly expensive illusion completely surround me. They were absolutely radiating arrogant confidence, deeply secure in the belief that they had successfully bullied me into funding their perfect societal triumph. They had no idea that their credit cards were currently declining, their bank accounts were locked by a federal judge, and the final checks they wrote to the venue were aggressively bouncing across town. The suffocating tension peaked as I watched the heavy wooden doors of the ballroom slowly open. The explosion was a spectacular masterpiece of public humiliation. Right in the middle of the best man's emotional toast, the heavy ballroom doors violently swung open. The head catering manager, a man who usually maintained a fiercely professional demeanor, marched directly toward my parents' table, his face incredibly flushed with pure, unadulterated rage. He didn't even attempt to whisper. "Helen, Richard, your final certified check just bounced, and your bank is informing us that your accounts are legally frozen due to a court order," he announced loudly, his voice echoing brutally over the microphone feedback. The entire room went dead silent. The groomsmen stopped laughing. Chloe's jaw literally dropped. My mother turned a sickening, ashen shade of gray, desperately sputtering about a simple bank error. But before she could successfully spin a lie, a man in a plain beige suit stepped out from behind the caterer. It was a licensed process server. He walked directly up to my parents, completely ignoring the horrified gasps from the extended family, and slammed a massive, thick stack of legal documents right onto their expensive dinner plates. "Helen and Richard, you are being formally served for severe civil fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and gross theft of trust assets," the server stated clearly, his voice carrying across the silent, shocked room. My father aggressively ripped open the file, his eyes widening in absolute, terrified horror as he read my name clearly printed as the primary plaintiff. The entire illusion violently shattered in real time. Chloe began to hysterically scream, realizing her perfect wedding was collapsing. My mother immediately collapsed into her chair, aggressively sobbing real tears of absolute panic as the venue manager loudly demanded they vacate the premises due to lack of payment. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and slowly walked away from the beautiful, burning wreckage. The wedding was completely and utterly destroyed. Without access to any funds, the luxury country club aggressively locked the doors, and the celebrity caterer immediately walked out. Chloe was eventually forced to have a pathetic, heavily downsized ceremony in a public park, crying hysterically the entire time. But the social humiliation was merely the beginning of their absolute nightmare. The explicit evidence of forgery was so undeniably overwhelming that my parents are now facing severe criminal charges for federal identity theft and wire fraud. Facing the very real threat of actual prison time, they aggressively settled the civil lawsuit. They were legally forced to completely liquidate their heavily mortgaged house and aggressively drain their retirement accounts to fully repay the $150,000 they stole from me, plus my massive legal fees. I secured every single penny of my grandfather's trust fund. The day the settlement funds finally cleared into my secure, private account, I officially and permanently blocked their numbers, severing all contact with my entire toxic bloodline forever. I used the money exactly as Grandfather Arthur intended. I bought the beautiful, historic townhouse with a massive down payment. I am currently writing this from my sunlit living room, surrounded by peace and total financial security. If you take anything away from my horrific experience, let it be this: blood does not automatically equal family, and sharing DNA does not give anyone a free pass to exploit your life. When toxic people show you that they view you strictly as a resource rather than a human being, believe their actions, not their manipulative, guilt-tripping tears. Set ironclad legal boundaries, fiercely protect your hard-earned financial independence, and never, ever be afraid to aggressively strike back when they try to steal your future.